"I guess I was never meant to be here," Heather said, her words slicing through the air as the wedding ceremony buzzed behind us. I froze for a moment, adjusting the strap of my silver clutch, feeling the smooth leather under my fingers. My gaze swept across the grand ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel, the chandeliers casting a soft glow on the polished oak floors, the floral arrangements in shades of ivory and blush carefully arranged along the aisles, each bloom perfectly in place. Guests murmured around us, champagne flutes clinking, laughter mingling with the soft hum of a string quartet, but it all felt distant, as if I were watching through a thick pane of glass. I smoothed my navy blue dress, the one Martha had helped me choose, the pearls at the neckline catching the light, reflecting a sense of care I had poured into my appearance, my hair neatly coiffed, silver strands catching the light with a subtle shine. I had imagined this day would be filled with joy, with laughter and shared smiles, a celebration of my daughter's new life, but instead, the words echoed in the hall, bouncing off walls that should have felt like home. I stepped back slightly, allowing the tip of my heels to press into the polished floor, feeling the subtle shift beneath my feet, a grounding point amid the swirl of emotions I kept locked behind a steady expression. I caught sight of Heather's face, her makeup immaculate, her lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her green eyes, which were sharp and calculating, scanning the room for reactions, for acknowledgement, for the power she wielded over this moment. I felt the cool air of the reception hall brush against the nape of my neck, the gentle scent of roses and lilies mixing with the faint aroma of hors d'oeuvres being passed, yet none of it could soften the blow. I breathed slowly, the rise and fall of my chest a quiet rhythm, and I reminded myself to maintain composure, to let the words settle without letting them define me. The guests continued their chatter, some glancing briefly in our direction, some absorbed in their own conversations, yet the space around Heather and me seemed suspended, weighted with the unspoken tension, a bubble of scrutiny and judgment. My hand brushed the edge of the table beside me, polished mahogany, cool and solid, grounding me in the present. I glanced around at the familiar faces of distant relatives and colleagues of Heather's fiancé, noting the small gestures of acknowledgement or polite avoidance, cataloging each movement as if it were a clue to the unfolding social dynamics. The floral arch framing the cake table seemed almost symbolic, a pristine archway into a celebration I no longer felt a part of, a portal through which I observed the life of my daughter, but could not step fully into. I adjusted my posture, lifted my chin slightly, and let my lips form a calm, neutral line. I reminded myself that I had spent decades nurturing, giving, supporting, and now the work of love and care was met with words that cut deeper than any reprimand or critique. My mind sifted through memories. Heather as a child running across our backyard on warm summer evenings, her laughter bright and unrestrained. The countless hours spent baking cookies, wrapping gifts, attending parent-teacher conferences. Every scraped knee kissed, every heartbreak consoled. Yet now, standing in the ornate ballroom, the culmination of those years pressed into this single moment, I understood the subtle patterns that had always been there, glimpses of control, manipulations disguised as concern, preferences for appearances over substance. I exhaled slowly, letting the air pass through me, acknowledging the sting but refusing to let it fracture my composure. I observed Heather as she interacted with the crowd, her smile never faltering, her gestures fluid and practiced, designed to convey warmth and generosity, masking the intent behind her words, the careful orchestration of perception. I let my eyes wander to the desserts lined neatly on the long table, each miniature tart and cake decorated with precision, each piece a testament to preparation and expectation, now tainted by the tension in the room. My hands rested on the polished wood, fingers tracing the subtle grain, a silent connection to the stability and continuity I carried within myself, despite the fractures forming around me. I allowed a quiet observation of the people around us, noting reactions, the occasional glance, the whispers, the polite yet pointed avoidance, and I cataloged it all internally, constructing a mental map of intentions, alliances, and dynamics. The soft notes of the string quartet filled the pauses between conversations. Yet in those moments, the music underscored the disparity between appearances and reality, the dissonance of expectation versus the emotional truth of the day. I let the subtle hum of activity, the shimmer of the chandeliers, the fragrance of flowers, and the polished surfaces merge into a canvas upon which my thoughts could move freely, unencumbered by overt display, yet acutely aware of the social choreography unfolding. I shifted my weight slightly, letting one foot press against the carpeted edge of the platform, feeling the texture beneath my heel, grounding myself in the minute details, the tactile reminders of presence, of reality, of agency. Heather's words lingered, not in accusation but in their precision, in their ability to define a boundary, to delineate a space in which I was an outsider despite my history, my care, my contributions. I tilted my head, acknowledging the precision of her statement, the way it resonated with truth in her perception yet held no dominion over the truth of my own existence and choices. I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible nod, a signal to myself that the measure of character and patience I had cultivated would guide my next steps, that the moments of quiet observation, the careful cataloging of interactions, the internal compass of judgment would dictate my actions without yielding to the immediacy of reaction or emotion. The champagne flutes shimmered in the reflected light, each tiny bubble rising with delicate persistence, a reminder of continuity and the passage of time, and I felt the subtle strength of restraint, the kind that comes from years of practice in navigating familial dynamics, the kind that allows one to witness injustice without being consumed by it, that preserves dignity while preparing for measured response. I took a slow breath, counting silently, feeling the balance between presence and observation, between the external expectation of composure and the internal calibration of emotion. The sound of polite laughter, gentle clinking of silverware, and murmured greetings created a rhythm that underscored the contrast between public celebration and private reckoning. My hand rested lightly on my clutch once more, feeling the smooth leather, the subtle weight of responsibility, the decades of experience encoded in every measured gesture, and I let myself be present, fully aware, fully grounded, yet quietly removed from the spectacle orchestrated around Heather. Each movement, glance, and whisper became a data point, a subtle confirmation of patterns I had long suspected, a basis for contemplation and planning. I did not respond verbally, I did not challenge, I did not break my posture or expression. I simply observed, catalogued, and allowed the emotional resonance of the words to settle within me, knowing that my response would be calculated, deliberate, and powerful in its due time, not driven by impulse but by reasoned intent, an echo of the quiet strength I had carried through decades of life, work, and care, a presence that no insult could diminish or erase. The reception continued around me, yet I remained rooted in the corner near the entrance, feeling the cool marble beneath my hands as I adjusted the folds of my dress. The chatter of guests, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it existed on the edge of my perception, distant and muted. I traced my gaze across the polished surfaces, noting the delicate china set for the hors d'oeuvres, the tiny crystal bowls that caught the light with each movement of the servers. My mind drifted backward, to days when I had orchestrated similar gatherings in our family home, carefully planning menus, arranging seating, anticipating conversations, and ensuring that everyone felt welcomed. The contrast now was stark. The meticulous care I once lavished seemed invisible, my presence reduced to a mere accessory to the event. I leaned slightly against the wall, feeling the texture of the wallpaper beneath my fingertips, its subtle floral pattern calming in its consistency, a small anchor in a room otherwise defined by social maneuvering and unspoken tension. As I observed Heather moving through the crowd, smiling at distant relatives, shaking hands with friends of her new spouse, I recognized the same practiced ease that I had noticed in her over the years, the ability to project warmth and charm while maintaining control over the narrative of the room. I allowed myself to catalog every gesture, every glance, every subtle shift in posture, building a mental map of interactions, the alliances and undercurrents that shaped the social environment. I thought of the past weeks, the careful emails, the phone calls, the attempts to coordinate with Heather and her fiancé, all meant to contribute to a seamless celebration, now feeling like relics of effort unacknowledged. I shifted my weight subtly, allowing the heels to dig just enough into the floor to ground me, noticing the way the light bounced off the polished surfaces, casting reflections that played across the walls, like ghostly echoes of presence. The string quartet played on, the notes floating in the air, delicate and persistent, a reminder of the temporal rhythm of events, yet entirely detached from the emotional landscape I navigated internally. I turned my attention to the floral arrangements once more, inhaling the subtle scent of lilies and roses mingling, recognizing how their elegance contrasted with the starkness of human interaction, their beauty indifferent to the complexities of offense, exclusion, and intent. I let my gaze follow the lines of the banquet tables, the smooth linens, the perfectly aligned silverware, each detail a reflection of order and care, yet highlighting the absence of acknowledgement, the deliberate oversight that rendered my presence secondary. The air in the room felt slightly cooler near the windows, where the late afternoon sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting a soft glow on the parquet floors. I allowed the quiet observation of these nuances to occupy my mind, a practice I had honed over years of navigating familial dynamics, learning to read between words, between silences, between gestures that carried unspoken meaning. I noted the positioning of guests, the subtle hesitations in movement, the brief moments of eye contact that held more information than overt statements could convey. Each detail was a clue, a thread in a tapestry that mapped out intent, alliances, and subtle power plays, the invisible choreography of relationships unfolding before me. I allowed myself a deep, steady breath, feeling the weight of my presence, the gravity of experience accumulated over decades, the sense that my role extended beyond the immediate event into a larger understanding of human behavior and family dynamics. The quiet resilience in my posture, the measured movements of my hands as I adjusted my clutch, the subtle nods and shifts in gaze, all were signals of internal equilibrium, a silent communication of observation and awareness. I reflected on the numerous occasions when my care and attention had gone unnoticed, moments when my contributions were minimized or dismissed, and recognized in those reflections the pattern that had been developing subtly over the years, each instance a thread contributing to the present reality. I focused on the soft cadence of conversation around me, discerning the tone and underlying intentions, recognizing the disparity between spoken words and implied meaning, cataloging each interaction as if it were a piece in a complex puzzle. I felt the quiet power in remaining composed, the strength in observing without reaction, in letting actions, words, and patterns reveal themselves in time, rather than rushing to respond impulsively. My eyes drifted to a distant corner where a cluster of guests conversed animatedly, their expressions polite but their focus elsewhere, reinforcing the sense that my presence was acknowledged only superficially, while the emotional stakes and subtleties of relationships unfolded beyond the immediate awareness of the majority. I allowed the tension to settle within me, transforming discomfort into measured attentiveness, the capacity to perceive without being consumed, to record without being entangled, to be present yet detached. The subtle hum of activity, the movement of servers, the gentle clatter of cutlery, the murmured greetings, became part of the rhythm I measured against my own internal sense of equilibrium, each motion and sound catalogued for patterns, for insights, for understanding. I traced the edge of the tablecloth with a fingertip, feeling the weave of fabric, the meticulous attention to detail, grounding myself in tactile reality, reinforcing a sense of control and presence within the landscape of subtle exclusion. I observed Heather again, noting the precise manner in which she managed interactions, how she projected warmth while steering attention, how her movements were calculated to influence perception. I allowed this observation to deepen, recording details internally without overt acknowledgement, preserving my dignity while gaining insight. The soft clinking of glasses punctuated the background, moments of laughter rising and fading, a testament to celebration that was outwardly cheerful yet internally dissonant for me, a juxtaposition that underscored the careful control required to maintain composure amidst subtle social dynamics. I noted the interplay of light and shadow across the room, the reflections on glass surfaces, the nuanced body language of guests, all as indicators of interaction and intention. I allowed myself to be fully present, aware of every subtle cue, every inflection, every gesture, while maintaining a steady, composed exterior, the hallmark of years of experience navigating the complexities of family gatherings and interpersonal relationships. I adjusted my posture, shifted slightly to gain a better perspective, and allowed the careful measurement of visual and auditory details to occupy my mind, creating an internal map of the unfolding social landscape. Each observation was processed with deliberate attention, cataloging nuances, noting patterns, preparing for the thoughtful, measured responses that would follow. I recognized the quiet satisfaction in being able to witness, to absorb, to understand without yielding to impulse, preserving dignity and agency within a context designed to challenge them. The subtleties of conversation, the faint inflections, the small smiles, the slight hesitations, all became points of reference, data in an intricate web of relational dynamics, each contributing to a growing comprehension of the situation and the necessary strategic patience required to navigate it effectively. The delicate balance between engagement and observation, between presence and detachment, became the central focus of my attention, the axis around which my awareness and response would pivot, ensuring that each subsequent action would be deliberate, informed, and consistent with the long-cultivated poise that defined my approach to moments such as this. I moved a few steps toward the refreshment table, noting the subtle choreography of guests navigating the space, the soft scrape of heels against the polished floors, the faint swish of fabric as servers carried trays of canapes. Eleanor allowed herself to observe without interjecting, cataloging the interactions as they unfolded with the patience of someone accustomed to watching patterns emerge over years of family gatherings and social nuance. The floral arrangements bordering the table seemed almost surreal in their perfection, each rose and hydrangea meticulously placed, a contrast to the imperfection of human behavior surrounding them. Her attention shifted to Heather, who was speaking animatedly with a cluster of friends from college, her gestures precise and controlled, the laughter she elicited measured, practiced, a tool as much as a display of charm. Eleanor noted the occasional glance that Heather cast in her direction, the brief flicker of awareness quickly masked by a warm smile, a signal Eleanor interpreted as both acknowledgement and assertion of control. She allowed herself to reflect quietly on the weeks leading up to this event, the countless calls, the detailed plan she had offered for the seating, the timing of the ceremony, the flowers, the cake, all intended to ensure the day was seamless. Each memory surfaced with a strange clarity, highlighting both her care and the subtle indifference she had encountered, a tension between expectation and reality that now crystallized before her. Eleanor adjusted the strap of her clutch once more, letting her fingers brush over the smooth leather, a small ritual of grounding and focus, reinforcing her presence and agency within the room. The light from the chandeliers above reflected softly in her eyes, and she allowed herself a measured inhale, taking in the scent of polished wood, fresh flowers, and the faint hint of perfume lingering from passing guests, each sensory detail anchoring her observation. She moved closer to the edge of the gathering, positioning herself strategically to survey the flow of conversation, noting the energy clusters where laughter and engagement concentrated, the gaps where politeness masked detachment, the subtle shifts in posture that signaled unspoken alliances and hierarchies. Eleanor thought of the past, of small gestures, shared moments, quiet conversations that had once created intimacy and trust, now reframed in her mind as data points, indications of a pattern she had begun to recognize over time. She saw the way Heather navigated social interactions, the efficiency and intention behind each word, each smile, each touch of a hand or nod of the head, the precision of movement that both engaged and distanced, connecting and asserting simultaneously. Eleanor let her gaze travel to the dessert table, the array of pastries, tarts, and mini cakes, each piece perfectly decorated and aligned, a silent testimony to planning and care, yet none of it acknowledged her input, her presence, or her investment in these moments. She allowed herself a slow breath, feeling the balance between being an observer and a participant, the quiet empowerment in choosing when to act and when to remain still, the subtle authority inherent in measured presence. She noted the interplay of light and shadow, the reflections in glasses, the movement of people through the room, each subtle cue a piece of a broader puzzle, each whisper, glance, and gesture contributing to an understanding of intent and influence. Eleanor recognized the quiet satisfaction in simply observing, in allowing patterns to emerge, in preserving her dignity while gathering insight, preparing for the appropriate moment of response when strategy would outweigh immediacy. She adjusted her posture slightly, her shoulders back, chin lifted, letting the composure of years of experience radiate subtly, a silent statement of endurance and discernment. The hum of conversation, the occasional clink of glassware, and the faint ripple of laughter became background texture against which Eleanor calibrated her own mental mapping of the room, her understanding of influence, control, and relational dynamics. Each small movement, guests shifting seats, servers passing trays, Heather's hand gesturing at a point in conversation, was noted, contextualized, and filed mentally, forming an intricate pattern of social navigation. Eleanor allowed herself to feel the quiet tension between the public spectacle of celebration and the private reality of interpersonal dynamics, observing the contrast between presentation and intention, surface and substance. The calm focus she maintained was not passive. It was a deliberate practice of internal regulation, a form of power that required patience, clarity, and awareness, enabling her to witness the unfolding events with acuity and readiness. She let her attention drift to small details, the alignment of silverware, the sparkle of glassware, the subtle arrangement of floral stems, elements that mirrored her own meticulous care and contrasted with the superficial recognition she received, reinforcing her understanding of value, contribution, and perception. Eleanor's eyes returned to Heather, noting the subtle shifts in her posture as she moved between conversations, the controlled modulation of her voice, the brief but calculated touches of hand on an arm or shoulder, all of which communicated presence, dominance, and direction without overt display. The gentle cadence of conversation, the occasional laughter, and the movement of people through the room provided a rhythm that Eleanor absorbed and incorporated into her internal map, understanding the social architecture and preparing herself for thoughtful engagement at the appropriate moment. She allowed herself a small nod, a quiet acknowledgement of clarity and comprehension, a signal to herself that observation and patience were sufficient for now, that strategy and dignity could coexist with endurance, and that the understanding she gained in these hours would inform her measured, deliberate choices in response to the subtle dynamics at play in the unfolding celebration. I stepped back toward the balcony doors, the sunlight streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows casting long, soft shadows across the polished hardwood floors, highlighting the intricate patterns in the grain. The faint scent of lilies lingered in the air, mingling with the subtle aroma of hors d'oeuvres, creating an atmosphere that felt both refined and isolating. I watched Heather from a distance, noting how effortlessly she navigated conversations, the slight tilt of her head, the precise modulation of her voice, the controlled gestures that conveyed confidence and charm, while maintaining authority over the room. The movement of her guests, some pausing briefly to smile at her, some leaning in as if to capture a private word, painted a map of influence that Eleanor had become adept at reading over the years. I allowed myself to observe quietly, noting the interplay of light and shadow on the faces, the subtle shifts in posture that spoke volumes about hierarchy and attention. My fingers traced the edge of the railing, the cool metal grounding me as my mind wandered back through the years, recalling moments when similar dynamics had existed, though less visible, more subtle, almost imperceptible until patterns emerged over time. The polished table surfaces reflected the chandeliers above, casting delicate sparkles of light across the room, a soft contrast to the tension that hovered just beneath the surface. Eleanor's gaze followed Heather as she laughed at a joke shared with a cousin, the laughter light and airy yet measured, designed to entertain while asserting presence. I noted the angles of glances exchanged among the guests, the micro-expressions that betrayed amusement, deference, or subtle judgment, cataloging each with the quiet patience of long experience. I reflected on the careful planning that had gone into this day, the invitations sent, the decorations chosen, the seating arrangements meticulously considered, and how those efforts, while intended to celebrate unity, now felt like background noise to a narrative of control and exclusion. Eleanor's thoughts turned to the history of small omissions, subtle slighted moments, the times when her contributions were acknowledged only superficially or not at all, each instance adding to the understanding of the patterns that Heather exhibited now. I allowed my awareness to stretch to the finer details. The way light caught the silverware, the delicate shimmer of glassware, the movement of the servers weaving through the crowd, each element a thread in the tapestry of observation. I noted the careful positioning of floral arrangements along the perimeter of the room, their elegance juxtaposed with the underlying tension of human interactions, a visual metaphor for beauty masking the complexity beneath. Eleanor's attention moved to the music, the soft strains of the string quartet providing a constant rhythm, each note punctuating the flow of conversation, adding structure to the otherwise unpredictable movements of social interaction. The timing of laughter, the soft clinks of glasses, the gentle hum of conversation all contributed to an environment Eleanor read with the precision of someone who had spent decades interpreting unspoken cues. I allowed myself to feel the subtle pulse of the room, the ebb and flow of energy, mapping the invisible currents of attention, influence, and expectation, constructing a mental blueprint of interaction that guided my measured presence. Eleanor's eyes drifted to Heather's hands, noticing the controlled gestures, the careful placement of hands on elbows, the slight nods that punctuated speech, the way her movements drew attention while maintaining distance. Each observation reinforced Eleanor's understanding of the social architecture, the balance of appearance and intent, the contrast between superficial engagement and underlying control. I inhaled slowly, taking in the subtle fragrances, the soft echo of movement on hardwood, the visual cues, the tonal qualities of speech, and allowed the quiet accumulation of data to form a comprehensive picture of the unfolding scene. Eleanor's posture remained upright, poised, an outward sign of composure, while internally she catalogued every interaction, every subtle inflection, every calculated movement for insight and preparation. The pattern of engagement and disengagement, inclusion and exclusion, became increasingly clear, revealing the undercurrents of authority and influence Heather exerted subtly yet effectively. Eleanor's awareness extended to the periphery, noting the gestures of those less involved, the peripheral glances, the slight hesitations, all contributing to the mental map of social alignment and positioning. She focused on the cadence of the conversations, the timing of pauses, the inflections of voices, using these cues to understand the underlying hierarchy and alliances at play within the gathering. Each micro-interaction, each flicker of expression, each slight movement became a data point, contributing to the growing comprehension of the social dynamics and guiding the strategic patience that Eleanor had learned over decades of navigating complex family relationships. I allowed my mind to integrate sensory input with memory, reflecting on past patterns, comparing previous gatherings with the present moment, reinforcing my understanding of the dynamics, the subtle manipulations, the intentional omissions, and the ways influence was asserted quietly but decisively. Eleanor's body remained steady, the calm demeanor projecting confidence and composure, the outward neutrality masking the meticulous internal analysis she conducted, balancing awareness with restraint, observation with strategic anticipation. I watched Heather move from group to group, noting the controlled charm, the timing of jokes, the careful modulation of voice and gesture, the way attention was directed and contained, each detail reinforcing the comprehension of the subtle social orchestration. Eleanor allowed herself a measured exhale, absorbing the rhythm of activity, the movements, the sounds, the shifts in attention, integrating them into her understanding of the environment, recognizing that the interplay of light, sound, gesture, and expression all contributed to the narrative unfolding in real time around her. I focused on the steady beat of my own thoughts, the calibration of observation, the patience cultivated through decades, allowing me to witness without being swept away, to record without engaging, to perceive without reacting, maintaining dignity and control even as the social landscape around me swirled with calculated interactions, nuanced gestures, and the subtle assertion of presence by Heather. I remained at the edge of the reception hall, letting my gaze sweep across the room as guests mingled and the subtle hum of conversation wove through the air like an undercurrent. Eleanor's mind catalogued every movement, every glance, every micro-expression, as if she were assembling a map of invisible connections and intentions. Heather continued to circulate among her friends, her laughter light and calculated, her gestures precise, each motion reinforcing her presence without revealing the true weight of her words earlier. Eleanor's eyes followed the flow of people, noting how attention shifted toward Heather, how conversations paused momentarily when she entered a cluster of guests, then resumed, guided by the subtle cues she orchestrated. The floral arrangements, with their ivory roses and pale pink peonies, lined the perimeter of the room, their elegance a stark contrast to the tension Eleanor felt radiating from the words and behaviors around her. She adjusted her posture slightly, feeling the smooth satin of her dress under her hands, the cool metal of her clutch grounding her in the moment, reminding her of her own presence, her own agency. Eleanor's thoughts drifted back to quieter times, to years of care, attention, and nurturing, each act unnoticed or taken for granted, now highlighted by the contrast between past recognition and current omission. She observed Heather's interactions carefully, noting the small nods, the fleeting eye contact, the way her tone modulated to convey warmth while maintaining authority, an artistry Eleanor had long since learned to read. The soft strains of the string quartet floated through the space, the notes weaving between voices and laughter, creating a rhythm that Eleanor internalized, matching the beat of her own steady heart, a rhythm of observation and quiet endurance. She traced the edges of the tablecloth with a fingertip, feeling the subtle weave of the fabric, the precision of its placement mirroring the meticulousness of the room, yet highlighting the absence of acknowledgement, the deliberate overlook of her presence. Eleanor's attention shifted to the guests who lingered in corners, the subtle hesitations in their movements, the polite smiles that masked uncertainty or curiosity, each gesture a thread in the fabric of the social dynamics she catalogued silently. She allowed herself to feel the weight of observation, the quiet satisfaction in noticing without reacting, in understanding without interference, a strategy honed over decades of navigating the subtleties of human relationships. Eleanor noticed the interplay of light on the glassware, the shimmer of the chandeliers reflected across polished surfaces, the delicate sparkle of cutlery under the soft illumination, all contributing to an environment of elegance that belied the underlying tensions. She took a measured breath, the rise and fall of her chest a subtle rhythm against the continuous flow of activity, grounding her in the present while her mind traced the intricate web of interactions, intentions and subtle power plays. Eleanor's gaze returned to Heather, noting the controlled energy, the careful modulation of movement and speech, the small gestures that commanded attention while maintaining distance, the orchestrated flow of engagement designed to assert presence and influence perception. She allowed herself to catalog these cues with meticulous care, each observation contributing to a comprehensive understanding of the social landscape, a map that informed her own internal sense of strategy, timing and measured response. The sound of soft laughter, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glassware created a rhythmic backdrop against which Eleanor placed each observation, noting how the room responded to Heather's presence, how attention shifted subtly, and how influence was exercised quietly but effectively. She reflected on the preparation that had gone into this event, the careful coordination of flowers, tables and seating, the hours spent ensuring everything would appear seamless, and considered how her investment contrasted with the current lack of acknowledgement. Eleanor's hands rested lightly on the railing of the balcony area, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers, reinforcing her awareness and providing a tactile anchor as she continued to process and understand the subtle dynamics unfolding. She watched the guests' interactions, the small exchanges of glances, the fleeting smiles, the polite nods, all contributing to the evolving social fabric, the unspoken rules and hierarchies that Eleanor had become adept at reading over years of experience. The gentle cadence of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter and the soft background music, created a flow Eleanor synchronized with internally, matching her calm composure with detailed attention, reinforcing her position as both observer and participant, measured and composed. Each glance, each shift in posture, each micro-expression was noted, catalogued, and processed internally, forming a comprehensive picture of intent, influence, and engagement, all while maintaining an outwardly neutral demeanor, a calm presence that projected dignity and composure. Eleanor's focus remained steady, balancing awareness with patience, observation with discretion, internalizing the subtleties of the room while preserving her agency, ensuring that her eventual actions, when they occurred, would be informed, deliberate, and aligned with the quiet strength she had cultivated over a lifetime. She allowed herself to notice the smallest details, the angle of a hand, the tilt of a head, the direction of a glance, each a piece of information, each reinforcing her understanding of control, perception, and influence within the social environment. The light continued to play across the polished surfaces, the subtle reflections on glassware and silver adding depth to her observations, each flicker and shimmer, a cue to the flow of energy and attention, reinforcing Eleanor's internal map of the unfolding interactions. She felt the quiet satisfaction of presence, the power of careful attention, the assurance that understanding came from observation rather than reaction, and that her dignity and awareness were sufficient to navigate the complexities of the evening without immediate intervention, preserving both strategy and composure as the celebration continued around her. I stepped toward the edge of the grand hall, Eleanor's heels making a subtle, steady rhythm against the polished oak floors as she navigated the space with careful awareness. The string quartet's melody floated in the background, delicate and continuous, providing a soothing counterpoint to the complex social landscape she was analyzing. Her eyes followed Heather as she moved gracefully from guest to guest, the fluidity of her gestures precise, intentional, each smile measured, each laugh light and strategically timed. Eleanor took note of the subtle shifts in posture and gaze, the way attention was drawn and held, how influence was exercised without explicit words, and catalogued every cue internally. The soft clinking of glasses, the occasional hum of conversation, the faint scrape of chairs across the polished floor. All were integrated into her mental map of the unfolding interactions. Eleanor allowed herself a brief observation of the floral arrangements that lined the perimeter of the room, noting the careful alignment of roses, peonies, and greenery, appreciating the visual order while recognizing that beauty and structure could not mask the underlying tension. She reflected on the contrast between the deliberate elegance of the setting and the imperceptible maneuvers of influence, the delicate interplay of presentation and intent, and allowed her thoughts to assess the environment with measured detachment. Eleanor's hand rested lightly on the banister of the balcony, the cool metal grounding her while she observed patterns, anticipated responses, and considered the implications of each exchange. Her mind revisited past family gatherings, the subtle omissions, the small slights, the quiet undermining masked by politeness, recognizing how these instances had culminated in her current understanding of Heather's behavior. Eleanor noticed the alignment of cutlery, the shimmer of crystal glassware, the subtle reflection of light on polished surfaces, and allowed each detail to serve as a reference point for calibrating her awareness, reinforcing the contrast between meticulous preparation and overlooked contributions. She observed the guests' movements, the timing of interactions, the light inflections in speech, and the patterns of engagement, registering how attention shifted and how influence circulated through the space, all without verbal intervention. Eleanor maintained a calm, neutral expression, her body poised, her posture upright, a visible signal of composure, while internally processing the intricate web of social dynamics. She noted Heather's controlled gestures, the tilts of her head, the direction of her eyes, the placement of her hands during conversation, each element a deliberate cue in the choreography of presence and perception. The subtle rhythm of conversation, interspersed with occasional laughter, punctuated the room, a continuous flow that Eleanor absorbed with focused attention, integrating sensory input with prior experience to map the invisible currents of control and intention. She allowed herself to witness without engagement, cataloging every nuanced interaction, the quiet power in observing without immediate reaction, the strength in maintaining dignity while accruing insight into behaviors and relationships. Eleanor considered the strategic value of patience, recognizing that the accumulation of observations, subtle clues, and patterns of conduct would inform her deliberate, measured responses in time, rather than succumbing to impulsive action. The light from the chandeliers shimmered across the polished floors, highlighting the careful placement of centerpieces and decorations, reinforcing the visual harmony while juxtaposing it against the subtle discord in relational dynamics. Eleanor noted the angles of glances, the timing of smiles, the slight hesitations in speech, and the positioning of bodies, all contributing to the complex landscape she navigated internally. She allowed herself to be fully present, processing the ambient soundscape, visual cues, and interpersonal interactions in tandem, creating a cohesive understanding of the social environment and the subtle hierarchies at play. Eleanor's breathing remained slow and steady, a conscious rhythm to maintain clarity, composure, and awareness, each inhale and exhale a reminder of her own agency and presence within the room. She focused on the micro-expressions, the subtle cues of dominance, attention, and alignment, cataloging them with careful precision, building a comprehensive mental map that would guide future decisions and interactions. The gentle hum of conversation, the soft clatter of glassware, the rustle of fabric as guests shifted in their seats, all contributed to the environmental context, enriching Eleanor's understanding of unspoken dynamics and social positioning. She allowed herself to appreciate the quiet efficacy of observing, the power inherent in patience, and the ability to interpret, anticipate, and understand without overtly asserting influence, preserving both dignity and control. Eleanor's attention returned to Heather, noting the deliberate charm, the controlled laughter, the nuanced gestures, the way attention was directed purposefully while maintaining a subtle distance, each action reinforcing the projection of confidence and authority. Eleanor absorbed these observations, integrating them with memory, experience, and intuition, constructing a sophisticated, silent understanding of relational dynamics, influence, and perception that allowed her to remain composed, informed, and strategically poised. The room continued to pulse with understated energy, the musical notes, the hum of conversation, and the subtle movements of individuals blending into a backdrop against which Eleanor maintained clarity, awareness, and deliberate restraint, fully grounded in observation while preparing for the precise moment to act with calm and authority. I stepped toward the periphery of the ballroom, Eleanor's movements measured and deliberate, feeling the subtle resistance of her heels against the polished oak floors as she repositioned herself to observe the room from a new vantage point. The soft light from the chandeliers reflected off the crystal glassware on the tables, casting a warm, diffused glow that contrasted with the cool composure she maintained internally. Eleanor noted the way Heather navigated through clusters of guests, each gesture carefully orchestrated, each smile timed to capture attention without revealing the undercurrent of tension beneath. The subtle inflections in Heather's voice as she engaged in conversation conveyed warmth, charm, and control simultaneously, an art Eleanor had learned to read with precision over years of careful observation. Eleanor's attention shifted to the seating arrangement, noting how guests aligned themselves around Heather and her spouse, how brief moments of eye contact were exchanged and quickly masked by polite expressions, and how proximity and positioning reinforced influence and social hierarchy. The music of the string quartet flowed through the air, a delicate counterpoint to the visual and auditory cues of conversation, providing rhythm and structure while Eleanor's mind catalogued patterns, gestures, and nuances. She reflected quietly on the history of her relationship with Heather, the subtle omissions, the understated manipulations, the ways in which her presence had often been minimized or overlooked, each memory reinforcing the clarity with which she now interpreted current events. Eleanor observed the interplay of light and shadow across the room, the shifting reflections on polished surfaces, the glimmer of chandeliers in guests' eyes, noting how visual cues, body language, and timing interwove to communicate messages beyond words. Her gaze returned to Heather as she laughed with a small group, the tilt of her head, the slight lean forward, the graceful movement of her hands, all carefully calculated to guide attention, convey connection, and assert presence. Eleanor allowed herself to absorb these observations with deliberate calm, the quiet satisfaction of understanding the subtleties of control and influence without needing to intervene immediately. She shifted slightly, letting her hand glide over the smooth surface of a nearby railing, the tactile feedback grounding her while she processed the layered interactions around her. The fragrance of flowers, faint and persistent, mingled with the aroma of carefully prepared hors d'oeuvres, providing sensory context that Eleanor incorporated into her awareness, each scent and detail contributing to the comprehensive map she constructed mentally. Eleanor noted the timing of movements, how attention shifted subtly among guests, how conversations paused and resumed, and how Heather maintained a balance between engagement and authority, reinforcing the projection of control without overt force. She reflected on her own past experiences in hosting and observing family gatherings, the years of nuance, patience, and careful assessment that had honed her ability to perceive intention, motive, and alignment, and applied that understanding to the current room with precision. Eleanor's posture remained composed, shoulders back, chin raised slightly, projecting calm and dignity while internally monitoring, analyzing, and understanding every micro-expression, every gesture, every unspoken interaction. The gentle clatter of cutlery, soft laughter, and murmured conversations created an ambient rhythm that Eleanor synchronized with internally, using it to structure her observations and maintain focus on the intricate dynamics unfolding around her. She allowed herself to notice the smallest details, the placement of glasses, the angle of plates, the slight hesitations in movement or speech, the subtle ways in which attention and influence circulated, each contributing to her growing understanding of the social landscape. Eleanor reflected on the deliberate elegance of the room, the careful planning of decorations and arrangements, the subtle tension that ran beneath the surface, and the contrast between appearance and reality, presence and influence. She considered the strategic value of patience, the quiet power inherent in observing without immediate reaction, and the insight gained from understanding patterns over time, rather than responding impulsively. Eleanor's awareness encompassed the full sensory spectrum, the visual cues of posture, gesture, and alignment, the auditory cues of tone, inflection, and rhythm, the tactile awareness of space, surface, and movement, and the olfactory backdrop of floral and culinary aromas, all integrated into a comprehensive perception of the environment. She observed Heather moving with practiced grace, the modulation of voice and movement, the subtle direction of attention, and the orchestration of social energy, integrating each observation with her own prior knowledge and experience to build a nuanced understanding of intent and relational positioning. Eleanor allowed herself a quiet exhale, feeling the equilibrium of presence and observation, awareness and restraint, readying herself for the precise moment when deliberate action, informed by insight, would replace passive observation. The rhythm of the room, the interplay of light and sound, the flow of conversation, and the choreography of gestures all served as both background and guide, supporting Eleanor's strategic patience and quiet authority as she continued to navigate the social dynamics with clarity, dignity, and deliberate control. I took a slow step toward the open foyer, Eleanor feeling the subtle shift in air as sunlight filtered through the large windows, illuminating the polished marble floors and reflecting off the crystal chandeliers above. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with the gentle aroma of hors d'oeuvres, creating a sensory backdrop that was both comforting and starkly contrasted with the tension that hummed just beneath the surface. Eleanor's eyes followed Heather as she continued to circulate among the guests, her movements precise, gestures carefully calculated, a practiced elegance that conveyed warmth and control simultaneously. Eleanor noted the interplay of body language, the subtle direction of attention, the way laughter was elicited and modulated to maintain influence over the group, and she catalogued each observation internally. The polished wooden banisters, the soft sheen of the floors, the reflections in the glassware, all were part of a visual landscape that Eleanor absorbed as carefully as the social cues, each detail reinforcing her awareness of the environment and the dynamics unfolding within it. She reflected on the years of subtle slights, moments of being overlooked, the quiet dismissals, and the small acts that seemed insignificant in isolation but, when accumulated, created a pattern that she now recognized with clarity. Eleanor's posture remained calm and poised, her hand resting lightly on the smooth railing, grounding herself while her mind mapped the intricate network of interactions, alliances, and intentions. The soft strains of the string quartet provided a rhythm that Eleanor internalized, linking auditory cues to visual and social data, each note a marker in the flow of observation and analysis. She allowed her gaze to drift to the details of the room, noting the perfect alignment of tables, the careful arrangement of centerpieces, the sparkle of cutlery, and the subtle glint of glass reflecting the chandelier light, appreciating the elegance while recognizing that decor could not obscure human intent. Eleanor observed the peripheral movements of guests, their slight hesitations, polite nods, and subtle glances, noting how these small cues reinforce patterns of inclusion, exclusion, and social alignment. She allowed herself a deep, steady breath, grounding in the rhythm of her own presence, integrating sensory observations with memory and understanding, reinforcing her capacity to remain composed while fully aware of the unfolding social architecture. Heather's controlled gestures, her modulation of tone, the deliberate pacing of interactions, each contributed to an orchestration of attention and influence that Eleanor read with practiced acuity. Eleanor catalogued every nuance, constructing an internal map of relational dynamics, noting the subtle assertion of control, the delicate balance of visibility and distance, and the manner in which attention was directed, constrained, and subtly manipulated. The soft murmur of conversations, the occasional clink of glass, and the ambient hum of activity provided a continuous backdrop, enriching Eleanor's understanding of context, energy, and the subtle flows of engagement. Eleanor reflected on the strategic value of patience, the power inherent in careful observation, the quiet authority of those who understood without speaking, and the clarity that came from patience and awareness accumulated over decades of experience. She observed Heather's smile measured and fluid, the tilt of her head, the placement of her hands, all contributing to an impression of effortless charm, an elegance that belied the underlying dynamics Eleanor now understood fully. Eleanor's awareness encompassed the full spectrum of cues, visual, auditory, tactile, and olfactory, each integrated into a comprehensive perception of the social landscape. She monitored movement patterns, attention shifts, the subtle energy in the room, the alignment of influence and perception, building a detailed understanding that would inform deliberate and considered response when appropriate. Eleanor allowed herself to feel the quiet strength in maintaining composure, the satisfaction in observing without impulsive reaction, the assurance that knowledge gained through careful observation was a powerful tool. She considered how the arrangement of people, the timing of gestures, the placement of attention, and the subtle orchestration of social energy reflected intent and hierarchy, and she integrated these insights with memory, experience, and instinct to maintain an internal sense of control. Eleanor's gaze returned to Heather as she interacted with guests, the careful modulation of laughter, tone, and gesture guiding the flow of attention, and Eleanor cataloged each movement, each inflection, and each alignment of focus. The rhythm of the room, the movement of servers, the soft hum of conversation, the delicate music, was a steady pulse against which Eleanor measured and calibrated her awareness, ensuring that every observation was accounted for, every nuance recognized, every opportunity for understanding maximized. Eleanor allowed herself to notice the smallest details, the shimmer of silverware, the reflection of light on polished surfaces, the micro-expressions of those nearby, all contributing to a complex, evolving map of social dynamics that informed her strategic patience. She maintained a steady posture, composed breathing, a calm exterior, while internally integrating the layers of information, the patterns of interaction, the subtleties of intent, and the intricate choreography of influence that played out in real time. Eleanor's awareness extended to peripheral cues, the faint movements of attention, the minor shifts in alignment among guests, and the soft modulation of voices, cataloging them into a coherent internal understanding of the relational landscape. The ambient energy, the interplay of sound, light, and movement, all were integrated into Eleanor's perception, a continuous flow of data that informed her comprehension of the current dynamics and strengthened her confidence in measured, deliberate action. She recognized the subtle satisfaction of remaining composed, the quiet power of observation, and the knowledge that insight gained in this manner was a tool of authority, dignity, and strategic patience, ready to be applied with clarity when the moment was right. Eleanor allowed the gentle hum of the room, the glint of chandeliers, the careful choreography of gestures, and the rhythm of conversation to form a complete backdrop, reinforcing her sense of control, awareness, and readiness as she continued to navigate the complex social environment with deliberate composure and quiet confidence. I stepped toward the large windows that framed the reception hall, Eleanor feeling the warm glow of afternoon sunlight cascading across the polished hardwood floors, highlighting the subtle grains and reflections of the chandeliers above. The air carried a faint mixture of floral fragrance and the gentle aroma of hors d'oeuvres, grounding Eleanor in the sensory richness of the space, even as her mind remained focused on the intricate dynamics unfolding around her. She observed Heather interacting with guests, her gestures precise, each movement calibrated to draw attention and maintain control, her smile polite yet strategically measured, the cadence of her speech projecting warmth while directing focus subtly. Eleanor cataloged every nuance, the tilt of Heather's head, the slight flicker of her eyes, the positioning of her hands, the brief pauses in conversation that signaled shifts in influence and attention, the soft clinking of glasses, the gentle rustle of fabric, the quiet murmur of conversation all formed a background rhythm that Eleanor internalized, integrating auditory cues with visual observations to create a comprehensive map of social interactions. Eleanor's posture remained composed, her hand resting lightly on the smooth metal of the balcony railing, grounding her as she processed the layers of human behavior around her, noting micro-expressions, subtle glances, and unspoken gestures that revealed intent and hierarchy. She reflected on the history of past family events, the subtle patterns of omission, the quiet manipulations, the ways her contributions and presence had often been minimized or ignored, and integrated these memories with current observations to deepen her understanding of Heather's behavior. Eleanor allowed her attention to sweep across the room, noting the alignment of tables, the placement of floral arrangements, the sparkle of glassware, and the polished surfaces, observing how the deliberate elegance of the setting contrasted with the underlying social tension. Each element, the angle of a glance, the timing of a smile, the modulation of voice, was catalogued internally, forming an intricate web of relational awareness and strategy. She noticed the subtle hesitations of guests, the fleeting interactions, the polite nods and glances that revealed alignment, interest, or avoidance, all of which she absorbed and processed with careful attention. Eleanor's mind connected these cues with her own intuition, decades of experience reading human behavior, and a keen understanding of social dynamics, allowing her to anticipate responses and interpret intentions without verbal engagement. She reflected on Heather's control over attention, the orchestration of influence, the way charm and composure were used as tools to manage perception, and Eleanor cataloged these patterns meticulously, noting where influence was asserted and where subtle exclusion occurred. The soft strains of the string quartet continued to flow, their melodies weaving through the space, punctuating conversations, and providing a temporal rhythm that Eleanor synchronized with internally, creating a steady cadence for observation and analysis. Eleanor allowed herself a deep, controlled breath, feeling the weight of awareness, the satisfaction of clarity, the power of patience and composure, knowing that understanding the intricate web of interactions provided strategic insight far beyond immediate reaction. She noted Heather's interactions with friends, the precision of gesture, the controlled laughter, the subtle guidance of attention, and recognized the consistent patterns of influence that had emerged over the course of the event. Eleanor observed peripheral cues as well, the slight shifts in stance, the angle of a hand, the subtle inflections in conversation, the brief acknowledgments that communicated intent without words, all forming an integral part of her internal map. She considered the visual and auditory details together. The reflections of chandeliers on polished floors, the shimmer of glassware, the gentle rustle of fabric, the cadence of speech, and how each element interacted with human behavior to create a dynamic, evolving social landscape. Eleanor maintained her composed exterior, a steady calm that projected dignity and control, while internally she processed an extensive network of signals, patterns, and potential implications, integrating them into a coherent understanding of the environment. She noted the spatial relationships among guests, the way attention shifted from group to group, the subtle cues that indicated alignment or deference, the micro-moments of influence and response, all catalogued with precision. Eleanor allowed herself to feel the quiet authority inherent in observation, the strength derived from understanding, the satisfaction in strategic patience, and the clarity of insight gained without direct confrontation. She observed Heather navigating the room with grace, the modulation of tone, the deliberate timing of laughter, the careful positioning of gestures, all contributing to a subtle orchestration of social influence and attention. Eleanor integrated these observations with memory, intuition, and awareness, constructing a comprehensive internal model of social dynamics, relationships, and subtle power structures that informed her sense of agency and prepared her for deliberate, considered responses. The soft hum of conversation, the faint clatter of utensils, the gentle movement of guests, and the continual flow of music created a layered backdrop against which Eleanor measured and interpreted each interaction, each gesture, each subtle inflection. She allowed the details, the shine of silverware, the reflections of light, the delicate arrangement of floral centerpieces, the movement of hands, the direction of eyes, to merge with the dynamics of attention and influence, forming a full-spectrum perception of the event. Eleanor's posture remained upright, composed, and steady, a physical embodiment of her internal poise, while her mind absorbed, catalogued, and interpreted the complexity of relationships, the interplay of presence and absence, the orchestration of charm and control, and the subtle dynamics that defined Heather's approach. She took a slow, steady breath, integrating the ambient sounds, the visual cues, the movements, and the patterns of interaction into a cohesive understanding of the social environment, maintaining a calm exterior while preparing for future actions guided by careful observation, strategic awareness, and quiet authority. Eleanor allowed herself to feel the subtle satisfaction of knowing, the quiet power of insight, and the clarity of perception, recognizing that the careful, deliberate attention she maintained throughout the event ensured she understood the full landscape of influence, intention, and relational dynamics, ready to act with measured, informed purpose when the time was appropriate.